Today we're going to talk about transitioning conservative students into environmental leaders through ServiceLearning, a step-by-step guide for educators. And it's our goal that by the end of the presentation, you'll walk away with a toolkit of basic techniques to transition your students into environmental leaders. And I'm Rosalind Brain. I'm an assistant professor in sustainable communities at Utah State University.
And I'm Kristen Ladd, and I'm a graduate student in American Studies with an emphasis in sustainability and environmental education.
So the first thing we want to share with you is the importance of finding a common ground in terminology and values, especially when dealing with more conservative students when talking about sustainability issues. And there's some lessons learned that we have from the field. And the first of those is the importance of pilot testing terminology with your audience. And this really came out in my dissertation research, where I was analyzing cattle ranchers and which ranchers would be more likely to go into conservation easements. And what I found when I pilot tested my survey instrument with cattle ranchers was that the terms environmentalist and conservationist were perceived extremely different in that audience. And the term environmentalist, when I ran a pilot study with ranchers, came across as a disconnected extremist lacking any agricultural experience, yet who imposed regulations on ranchers without understanding their lifestyle. So that was a quote from the pilot test conducted. And but yet conservationist was seen as someone who wanted to preserve and protect the land for future generations. And as a researcher trying to analyze sustainability, the term conservationist was really what I wanted to get across in my measurement. And so I ended up using that in the instrument. So it just shows the importance of pilot testing, which words you're using when communicating sustainability. The next point is a pilot test can really help prevent measurement error as well. And not only that can be seen in the example of environmentalist and conservationist perceptions, but also there's an environmental identity scale by Stetson-Biga that measures the people's perception in relation to the natural environment. And with cattle ranchers, the term natural environment, they were confused as to whether that meant areas of their land where cattle were grazing or fenced off areas that were not open to grazing, or whether that was just all non-paved land. And so the way that the term could have been interpreted would have really changed the research results and caused a large amount of measurement error.
So what I looked at is, in my research, is how cowboy poetry and music festivals could also be used as a common language between ranchers and environmentalists. And this was a common ground area that I had come across as a humanities grad student, and especially in Utah area, it's very popular as ranching and meat production is as well. So I want to find common ground based on how to engage more communities in environmental stewardship, to look at social responsibility as well as economic profitability. And what I found with cowboy poetry is that it's been around for a very long time, that a lot of ranchers and cowboys really identify with it. And it seemed like a fun way to include more people in a more human aspect and social aspect, into ushering them into a more environmental sustainability and changing their behavior towards sustainability. And what I found was that poems and songs create a sense of place that can affect sustainable behavior in a more complex way than economic incentives, and that it brings in really the human side. So even though it's a very different way, you can look at finding common ground and common language between environmentalists and not traditionally environmentalist groups through a lot of different venues. And so this was just one of those examples. But I'm sure, depending on where you live and where you're from, that you can find different ways as well. The next point we wanted to get to was key concepts behind service learning to foster lasting pro-environmental change. And this was really going into that step-by-step guide of translating not only common ground language to several people in an area, but then also to students, and how they can also become environmental leaders. And that one of the ways is through ServiceLearning, which Utah State is especially known for. And we look at ServiceLearning as a way to make a difference in the community, to combine service with student academic coursework, enhance learning through experience, and create sustainable change in the form of a capstone project. Or we also did an Earth Week, which each of the students who were in Rosalind's class, myself being one of them, this past semester, we did a project where we each did huge sustainable behavior change work and research on campus.
So in tying those two together, the importance of finding common terminology and then also service learning came across in the class that I taught last spring, which was sustainable living. And what I found is in being new to the state of Utah, I felt it would be best to communicate environmental messages through people that were more familiar with the area, and that was the students themselves. And if we wanted to foster campus-wide pro-environmental change, to do it from the students to the students. And so in developing the course as a service learning class, the first thing I wanted to know is whether or not application of course materials in the field was actually resulting in change. And so mid-semester, I conducted a life skill assessment, and we did a post then pre-test, which had the students think about, as a result of the class, what skills did they have before, and how have they developed those skills, if they have at all, now as a result of the course content. And what was found through a paired samples t-test was that all the skills that were measured were statistically significant in their level of change. That was at a p-level of 0.001 or smaller, and 95% confidence. And the amount of people that we surveyed for this was 27. There were 30 in the class, but a few were missing the day that we did the assessment. And the largest changes were from the pre-test to post-test were in outreach and communication techniques, and so in the ability to use prompts to foster pro-environmental change, applying effective communication messages to foster pro-environmental behavior, and implementing large-scale change, so at a university-type level that saw a large change increase from an average before of less than confidence, so that would be towards the 1 and 2 side. And then now, as a result of the class, they went to between 3 and 4, and so that was a large leap in overall confidence of the students. And then in other areas like norms and commitment and applying sustainability strategies in the workplace, what was important in some of those, seeing the significant changes in the bottom questions of the scale, was that these skills now extended beyond the classroom, and so the students were seeing that when they were in the workplace or communicating with others outside of the class, that they were still seeing that they have gained a significant life skill change as a result of the service learning. In communicating with the audience, I not only wanted the students in the classroom to use their experience and skills gained to communicate out to a similar age group to foster pro-environmental change, and this mainly happened in the form of Earth Week, which you heard a little bit about a few minutes ago. But Earth Week was a campus-wide event. It was our first annual one we did as an experiment with the Sustainable Living class. It was extremely successful. We had over 5,000 people engaged in Earth Week, over 1,000 pledges by students in various environmental issues. In creating Earth Week, I had the students in the class design a campus-wide sustainability survey, and that involved barrier benefit analysis. So if we wanted to try and get students to recycle properly on campus, if that was one of the activities, then what are the current barriers that they face with recycling? What are their perceived benefits to recycling? And how can we capitalize on that and break down the barriers and increase the benefits? And then the next was looking at perceptions of various sustainability topics. So air quality is a big issue we face here in Logan, Utah, because there's an inversion because we're surrounded with mountains, and creates a strong inversion effect in the wintertime. And so we wanted to look at, what do they perceive about air quality or climate change and other popular terms? How do they perceive those terms? And then lastly, we shared the results back to the students who had completed the survey to see what students on average across campus felt, and used those results to plan the Earth Week events that ended up being very successful and highly attended. And lastly, the use of service learning, the success in that came across in the end of the semester evaluations, where the students rated the course on average either higher or much higher than all classes taught at the university. And that was in all areas of the evaluation that we conduct on campus. And an example, I'll just read one of these quotes of what the students developed from the class. This is one of the quotes from the evaluation. "This course was the most useful course I've ever taken in my 4 years as an undergrad and 1 year as a grad student." So the course was a mixed undergraduate, graduate level class. "Rosalind designed and executed her course with expertise, fun, creativity, and taught me so much for my future career as a professional and goals as a student. I walked away from the course feeling as though I'd made a difference in my own life, on campus, and in my career. Thank you, Roz, for being one of the most finest professors I ever had." And I actually think that where the usefulness and the skills had come out of that was in their application and serving as experts in the field. And I see an importance in service learning in connecting with non-traditional audience.
And so, having been one of the students in that course, I can definitely attest to the fact that it will help me to be a better teacher in environmental education and work with more types of people, environmentalists, conservationists, all across the board. So what I'm looking at here right now to conclude our presentation is your toolkit that you can walk away with if you would like to design a course like this or go into sustainable behavior change. The first is to pre-test terminology, barriers, and benefits with surveys, observations, and interviews, and that includes finding different ways to find common ground language with the different people that you're working with. Secondly, provide feedback to your audience. And so as we saw, providing feedback to students and teachers on campus who filled out surveys. Allows students freedom to develop messages and activities. And so that increases the likelihood that students will be able to use this in their careers because they are developing the messages and activities themselves and being able to execute them in actual active ways, such as we did with Earth Week. Grade students on implementing change beyond memorization, comprehension of concepts. And so that includes, once again, being able to actually develop their own projects and going out into the field, executing things on campus or in the community that you're trying to target. And finally, tie in sustainability communication with local religious values and university values. And this one is a very important one that assesses, I think, all the parts of the toolkit because it really comes down to communication and basing that communication on a sense of values and local place. And so thank you very much for listening to our presentation.
And if you have any follow-up questions or would like to see an example of the syllabus for sustainable living or any of the instruments we talked about or research, you can feel free to email me at Roslyn, ROSLYNN, .brain, BRAIN, @usu.edu. Thank you.